So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge Johnny Valeris for editing and producing this content. Johnny runs a YouTube channel called The Lone Chemist, on which he provides commentary on film, music, media, politics, and anything else he finds interesting, using the formats of live podcasts, film, and album reviews, and video essays. Please go to his channel at youtube.com, The Lone Chemist, to watch his content. All right, welcome to our Faces of Science podcast. My name's Oliver Hayes, and I'm a member of Northwestern University Building on Diversity, better known as NUBonD. We're a graduate student-led organization within the chemistry department at Northwestern, whose primary goal is to foster a community built on inclusivity and diversity. So one of the ways we accomplish this is by inviting guest speakers who have both established themselves as renowned scientists and simultaneously are actively addressing a multitude of systemic barriers that hinder diversity and inclusion in STEM. Scientists often have many chances to showcase their scientific work, but rarely do we have the opportunity to learn about the person behind the scientific interests. So we're thrilled today to have Professor Benny Chan with us from the College of New Jersey. So thank you, Benny, for joining us and giving us the opportunity to get to know you.
Awesome. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. So, Benny, to begin, I'd just love to hear your story. Perhaps you can share a little bit about some of your identities and perhaps give us some insight in how you became a chemist and what sparked your interest in science.
Right. So happy to talk about that. So some of the identities that I hold is, so I would call myself a gay chemist, cisgender, mostly male, definitely on the masculine side. Of the, in terms of gender and gender expression. Other identities, I have a husband. We have a family. We have an extended family that is not just the two of us. We also have, I'm also a grandparent with a daughter, 28 years old, and a grandson who is 3 years old. But in terms of the other identities that I have my technical side too. I am a inorganic materials, crystallography type chemist with a strong interest in research and sociology, diversity, equity, inclusion. And I just love thinking deeply about a lot of major problems that we're having either in chemistry or in society.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's a hugely complex kind of patchwork of identities. So thank you for sharing. So I guess another kind of follow-up question is, how did you become interested in science? Or have you narrowed down a kind of point in your life where you feel like that sparked?
So probably my interest in science started in high school. I ended up having a really good chemistry teacher and a physics teacher. Just thinking about it, they're the ones who got me started by thinking that was really hard. And I actually enjoyed doing something that was hard. So I kind of took that through college. I went to college first as a pre-med kind of intentions. I grew up, in terms of other identities, I grew up in a fairly low income kind of family, a very blue collar kind of family. But my family always wanted me to go to college. So all my cousins all went to college. So my parents said, you have to go to college. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, I have this interest in science. The only science-y type person I knew in a professional world was a medical doctor. So that's the only kind of person I knew that had an advanced science degree. So I went to college with that kind of intention of thinking about medical school, went through it, like many students, did really well in general chemistry, and then I got to organic chemistry. Ooh, that was bad. It wasn't horrible compared to some of my other colleagues, but for me, that was like my lowest set of grades ever. Sure. So then it was like a total existentialist crisis that most of our students actually go through sophomore year. It's like, my entire identity was built on being a pretty good student, working hard, and all of a sudden I'm putting this hard work in and it's not working at all. So after the organic kind of fiasco, I had to kind of reevaluate, the whole medical school. I still tried. I ended up applying to medical school. I got waitlisted at 4 different schools, and then never heard back from any of them. So at this time, I also did undergraduate research with one of my faculty members. I did it in solid state chemistry, made mixed metal sulfides. So that experience was also transformative for me. And after I didn't get to medical school, I'm like, oh, they told me about this grad school thing. Maybe I'll try that and see what happens. But I was still kind of wanted to go to medical school, so I decided to work for a year. And I worked as a analytical chemist at Merck.
Okay.
And it was a quality control chemist. So that was essentially doing titrations, wet chemistry for 40 to 80 hours a week. We had a lot of overtime. Wow. So it was a little bit crazy in terms of doing that for the year. And once I saw that job, I'm like, I can't do this. I like that research kind of world. The medical school thing still wasn't working out. So I decided to go to graduate school. And then that's kind of, working through that.
No, yeah. I feel like a lot of moments in that story are very relatable for people out there. And something you mentioned was this kind of feeling of anxiety when you realized that your identity, which you had built on being a good student, was kind of, jeopardized after getting a bad grade. And I wonder if moments like that also kind of help you find other identities that you kind of can invest in and feel akin to in those moments. So yeah, you kind of touched on this as well, but to what extent did you have role models at points in your career or early on in your life?
So role models, so that's an interesting question. A lot of people and I have some definite opinions on role models. A lot of people sit there and tell me like, oh, you need somebody that looks like you to be a role model. And I actually disagree with that model. In terms of the role models that I've had, they're people that actually cared about my well-being.
Right.
And it didn't matter what their identities were. So, for example, my undergraduate research advisor cared about my well-being and my development as a student, would talk to me about stuff besides the work we were doing. So that was critical in terms of finding the right role models. I would also probably say that I'm a bad mentee. So I tend to be super, super independent. And I don't always listen to advice, even though, people are kind of giving, this kind of advice through mentoring. So, this independence in me, kind of thinking back about, these upsetting kind of anxieties with the grades. I was still very independent, and I still try to grind through it. And that's kind of how I worked through my career. But as I became a professional, as a faculty member, I started realizing the power of mentoring, mentees, and people that are watching out for me. And I listened to a lot of people as I became a faculty member, particularly my postdoc advisor, Peter Dorhout. He was a great mentor, and we would talk about, career kind of options for me, and it was fantastic to actually listen. And I actually, for once, listened to a mentor and kind of went through and said, okay, these are the kind of things they're doing. He's the one who got me connected with the American Chemical Society. He told me I should check out the Younger Chemist Committee and go work with those folks. And once I started working with those folks, it was like eye-opening about how much stuff that you can do as a professional in the chemistry field that isn't just technical.
Right.
So it was a nice community. And through that community, I met a lot of people that offered a lot of different advice. In terms of the role models, you kind of think about it and just you take and pick and choose what things you think will work for you. And I picked what I thought would work for me. And that's how I kind of networked my way into success.
No, that's really an interesting perspective, right? I feel like we often put a lot of pressure on people to be good mentors and kind of educate themselves on how to connect with people and mentor students. But you kind of describe a path of learning to be a mentee, and
Mm-hmm. Right,
that's equally as important.
Absolutely. And just thinking about it, for me to find another Asian chemist that is, that grew up in a low income family, that grew up in the United States, it's, there probably isn't another mentor with all of those identities.
Right.
So you kind of have to pick and choose and find some gay role models that you might pick some concepts through. Maybe there's some American-born Asian people that I can pull from, or there's just people there that are just willing to help.
Yeah. Okay, so this is something I think many of us think about, but of course I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Why is diversity important in the natural sciences?
Oh, this is fantastic. So, representation totally matters from my perspective. So this is one of the things that I've been thinking carefully about, because I want to create a technical reason why, diversity matters. And it's hard, particularly in a field like chemistry, it's hard because thinking about, the work that I do in terms of these chalcogenide, mixed metal chalcogenides and coordination complexes and rare earth chemistry, the actual molecules themselves don't actually care who's doing the work.
Right.
So they're just going to, they're going to follow the rules of thermodynamics and kinetics, and, whose hands is actually doing it may not really matter.
So when I sing to my reactions, they aren't listening?
Maybe.
Is what you're telling me?
Yeah, they might be listening. So maybe there's another variable in there that we're not quite working with. There is work in terms of ultrasonic type chemistry. So, just trying to think about it. So I don't think a lot of the chemistry really matters, who you are. However, our science isn't done by ourselves anymore. Like, how many single author papers do you actually see in chemistry and physics?
They stress me out when I see those. It's like, how did you do that in a vacuum?
Yeah. So it's impossible. So, science is done in teams these days.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people are ignoring the identity piece and who the people are in these teams. So the real reason I think diversity is super important in terms of teams. So I'm actually in the middle working on a workshop that we call the science of team science, and trying to understand the social science behind teams. But having a diverse team actually supports better ideas, stronger ideas in the long run. You may come to the same conclusions, but having a very diverse team with different backgrounds, different points of views, different positionalities allows people to slow down their thinking process, because you should be having more conflicts. You should be having more discussions. You should be slowing down because somebody is a biochemist and you're working on this more inorganic kind of metals kind of project. The biochemist needs time to actually understand what's happening on the inorganic side. So forcing you to slow down and really rethink your problems is really important to actually get the best results possible.
Yeah.
So I think there's a business case for diversity and inclusion, and there's a scientific case for it, that we should be working towards better ideas, because we have a lot of different kinds of people with different backgrounds, and diversity very broadly defined, including, you go to different kinds of schools, and not everybody on your team is from a top 10 graduate program.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to think about diversity.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautiful, and I really couldn't agree more. I've personally loved working at interfaces of science, but also interfaces of communities, of people. So, yeah, as a scientist who also identifies as gay, it's refreshing to hear a professor come and speak to us with a seminar title with the term "gay superpowers" in. It's really empowering, and I was just wondering if you could expand on what you mean by this phrase.
Sure. The funny thing about this talk is that I was invited to give a talk at CERMAX, the Southeast Regional Meeting of the American Chemical Society, and it was a gay symposium for gay chemists. And I have a little bit of issue with that because I think we're more complicated than just gay.
Sure.
We have lots of different identities, but I'll work with it. And I just had this idea in the back of my mind of trying to push the envelope at an American Chemical Society meeting about what you can actually talk about, what is appropriate, what is inappropriate. So pushing some of those boundaries a little bit. So I thought, one of the ways we can play it, superheroes are really a hot trending topic right now with all the Marvel movies, the X-Men style movies, the DC movies. So it's pretty interesting to think about it. And I also grew up in the 80s where we had a lot of comic book culture in there. So I read a lot of comic books when I was in late elementary, middle school, and so it influenced me quite a bit. So trying to rethink about the superpowers is just trying to think about what our unique identities actually brings to the table, and how I think my gay identity actually helped me quite a bit through my career and working on it, because that is the other concept of diversity and inclusion, that this difference that we have is actually good, and that different point of view is good. I don't know how empathetic I would be if I didn't have this gay identity, and actually living nearly getting kicked out of my family's house, coming out to my parents, and the first thing my dad says, "Don't tell anyone."
Wow.
And understanding that other people are going through that and worse, people actually getting kicked out or going to conversion camps or, these kinds of things. It allows me to be more empathetic about a lot of different kinds of situations, not just about being gay. But what if you grow up Black in America, or and you have to worry about driving while Black, or going to the park while Black, or if you're from Mexico, and people are looking at your shoes to see whether you're and asking for your papers, and it's just horrifying that I don't have to experience that kind of stuff, but there are people out there. So just trying to redefine myself and the advantages that we have by being different is kind of the idea behind the talk. And I wanted to give something that was also empowering, because I feel like empowering others is important. So letting everybody know we all have different kind of superpowers, and it's very different, what we bring to the table that isn't just our technical skills.
Yeah, no, it was really lovely to listen to the talk yesterday. It's, like I said earlier, it's not often that people kind of refer to kind of marginalized identities as empowered, as having superpowers, and the empathy really spoke to me. I agree. I wouldn't be the person I am today, and I wouldn't have come along the trajectory I've trodden today without that major component in my life, and being able to connect with people through empathy and see them for more than what they just visually kind of display. I guess, okay, silly question. If you were to be in a comic, have your own comic franchise, what would your superpower be?
So if I were to be in a comic, and what would my superpower be?
You can have a film if you want.
If I wanted to have a film, that's kind of crazy. I actually would have to say this is too hard.
Yeah, I figured.
Just thinking about it. So so I think what I would love to do is kind of rethink the comic book and the superheroes, and making sure that it is a gay Asian superhero, first of all, so that we get some representation. And also there's this underlying societal concept that Asian people are very submissive,
right.
That we just are workhorses, that model minority kind of thing. So somebody who's also super disruptive. And you know, so I'm also a Harry Potter fan. So and I would consider myself to be, you know, the House of Slytherin.
Right.
So it's more of an ambition. So I would almost like to see myself almost as this kind of chaotic good kind of person. So if we want to bring back to a like a D&D kind of reference.
Yeah.
So just being like this chaotic good-ish kind of person. So somebody that is kind of built on those characteristics. So like another Deadpool style character in there that is about disrupting systems for the future good, but also kind of tackling things in potentially questionable ways.
Yeah.
So, you know, the overall superpower, I think, is just this kind of crazy ability to you know, kind of fight. You know, I think fighting is just in general, it'd just be awesome to do like this martial arts style stuff. But I think, you know, kind of having like super healing powers would be pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the power that I would have would actually be my brain,
right,
in terms of thinking critically,
right,
about it. So having that super intelligence to work through these problems and finding the best solutions around them, that may be a little more non-traditional.
Oh my God, we gotta get this in press. I want to read it. Okay. Yeah, that was fantastic. It's pretty clear to anyone who, you know, starts to internet stalk you for a little bit, that, you know, you're doing some things that professors traditionally don't spend their time doing. For example, besides the research you're doing in the lab, you're also actively studying groups of people, diversity, inclusion, retention of students, and equity amongst STEM students. Could you kind of expand a little bit more about this and how your interest in this research came to be?
Awesome. Yeah, so this has actually become my love of research. So a lot of this started first with doing safe zone training for the LGBTQ plus community on our campus, and becoming essentially training other faculty members about safe zones and what to do when you have a queer student come to your office. So I have a few issues with safe zones right now because I don't think they're great at what they kind of do. It's a very passive system. I think allyship is actually better. So training faculty on how to speak up for marginalized communities is actually more important. Okay. But I got linked up with the American Society of Engineering Educators. It was a cold contact, somebody at the ACS meeting that I met through all my networking events, actually at a gay event at the American Chemical Society. It was a presidential reception. Sat there and pulled me aside. Oh, you got safe zone training. Hey, this person, you should contact them. They're looking for safe zone trainers. So I contacted Stephanie Farrell at Rowan University, and it was a cold contact. I didn't know her. I just knew she had a project that she's working on safe zone. And it was actually shocking how that safe zone happened at ASEE. It actually was so there was some sort of piece written about queer people or gay people in engineering, and then somebody wrote a response to whatever was published. I don't know all the details, and it was the most disgusting religious arguments about and all misconceptions about gay people, like telling why should we be supporting people when they're kind of diseased and their lifestyles are lead to to them dying early, and it's toxic for people. And they published this scathing opinion piece. So it actually, it created such a rift that this whole diversity, equity, inclusion thing for for the queer community was born kind of out of this, because they wanted to address the issues. And Stephanie Farrell is one of the leaders of doing that for the group. So she's absolutely amazing. She's an ally that fights very hard for the queer community. So in this process of becoming a train-the-trainer for that group, they actually brought in social scientists in. And actually started working with us in terms of how do you do facilitations? What are the fundamental social science theories that guide what we're going to do? And this is where I started learning about things like social identity, things about intersectionality, and what are the paradigms of diversity. So I didn't even know what a paradigm was. You know, we work in paradigms. Paradigms are sometimes so fundamental we don't even know we live in it. So the chemist point of view, one of the paradigms that we have is that matter is made of atoms.
Right.
It is so fundamental we don't even think about it sometimes.
Right.
So thinking about diversity and inclusion in terms of paradigms and how to shift people through paradigms is fascinating, and kind of working through that. And then it was through this kind of work. At the same time I was doing the Safe Zone training, I got involved in a couple of NSF grants on campus through the STEM program. So that's scholarships in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And so that program was to support low-income students with scholarship money and support to graduate with STEM careers. And when I started working in that program, I started understanding a lot of the data that was going through to prove that we had a gap in achievement for different students. So two of these projects together allowed me to start to rethink, just about everything that I do on a daily basis. So thinking more about my classrooms and how am I creating equitable situations for classrooms?
Right.
How am I using data to inform my teaching, mentoring, and research in general? And then shortly after this, I got linked up with a sociologist on our campus. It was really funny. This is Lynn Gaisley. She did her postdoc at Northwestern.
Okay.
With Rick McGee, over in the biomedical school. So it was pretty awesome. And she studied with Rick, retention of biomedical graduate students. And looking at the race issues and kind of thinking about that. And so my dean told me, hey, you should go have coffee with this person. And my dean has been phenomenal. So going back to the role models, that's another person that I would have as a major role model. My dean, Jeff Osborne. So he told me to have coffee, and we did, and we immediately clicked. And then I said, there's a whole project that we can actually study our students and do the same kind of analysis or similar kinds of analysis that she worked on with Northwestern. So it was pretty awesome to hear that. And now, I'm one of her kind of research collaborators. I joined her research group. I'm learning interview techniques. I'm starting to learn coding. I'm starting to do actual real statistics. So it's not the analytical style of statistics where we do 3 measurements, get a standard deviation, and we're done.
Right.
Like, how do you deal with 100 students and what is a population and what is this p-value everybody keeps talking about? I'm like, oh, okay. So stuff that I've never learned before. So it's been fascinating to actually hit it through a very scholarly kind of path. So I guess that's the other thing that I was able to navigate that not everybody is able to do, is that I think carefully about currencies that are valued. So currencies that are valued in terms of academic life are publications, grant money. And if I can leverage things like publications, presentations, and grant money, I can do the kinds of things that are interesting that may be a little bit more non-traditional. So we're starting, we have a significant amount of funding to do these kinds of studies now. And we're putting out a lot of presentations, a lot of workshops, and now we're starting to get all of our publications lined up.
And
to
the funding
do this kind
is
of work
through Science Foundation.
Yeah, a lot of the funding is through National Science Foundation, through DUE, which is Division of Undergraduate Education. which is part of their, I think it's called EHR. It's the Human Resources. It's the social science wing of National Science Foundation. So it's really fantastic that, I've been able to bring in about $3 million of money.
It's incredible.
At a PUI, a predominantly undergraduate institution. Typically you see that kind of money at a research institution.
Right.
And we also have funding through HHMI, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. We have an Inclusive Excellence Grant. So that is actually designed to take all the concepts we've learned about equity inclusion in our classrooms, and let's see if we can actually transform our first 2 years of curriculum in science, so in the natural sciences, so biology, physics, mathematics, and chemistry. Can we change our classes around and make it more equitable, make it more inclusive? And the concept of inclusive excellence is pretty awesome because, a lot of people think, you can't have diversity. You have to lower standards to get diversity.
Right. We hear that a lot.
Total crap. Yeah, you hear that a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm like, absolutely not. Because at the end of the day, my molecules don't care who's doing it. It just cares whether you're doing good science or not. And good science comes in a lot of different ways. Good science looks differently for different people. So we can do excellent work in inclusive ways.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. I'm excited to see kind of where that leads and what you guys learn from these studies. And perhaps you've learned stuff already, and perhaps you can comment on some of the biggest challenges you think underrepresented students face, or in particular queer students face in pursuing STEM careers. Yeah,
so absolutely. There's a tremendous amount of racism that goes on for our students of color. Yeah. A lot of it is very subtle, microaggressive. So one of the stories I always tell is, there's an interview that Lynn had done, and I believe it was a black student. And this black student was tired of being confused for the janitor in the department.
Oh,
so people would ask, can you go take this trash out? I mean, it's there are assumptions about, somebody's job and the color of their skin. So these things are horrible. And then it goes even deeper than that. So if you actually dive into the data, I would actually say the entire STEM curriculum is classist and racist. Because it's built upon this whole idea of math preparation. And math preparation is closely aligned to funding in schools. And in particular in New Jersey, our students of color tend to come from the same school districts, because New Jersey, even though we're a pretty blue state, everything is extraordinarily segregated.
Right.
So you can tell based on, what zip code you are, what high school you went to. You can predict, what kind of income you have and what kind of funding your school has. So by understanding that a lot of it is not their fault is really the thing that we're trying to drive our curricular changes and make things more explicit. So if you have a family that has gone to college, your family would tell you, why aren't you going to office hours? And then if you have a student who never had a family member, the interviews that we've had with students, they thought office hours was a time for professors to sit in their office and do work.
Yeah.
It wasn't a time for you to go ask questions. So that fundamental difference is enough to not allow these students to, or it's a barrier for these students to go seek help.
Yeah.
Also, we find that our students that we get, students of color, particularly through the programs that I work with, come from these high schools that are underfunded. They've made every single perfect choice that they have. So another interview we've had, a student picked every single math course that was available at their school. Algebra 2, I think it was something like their instructor went on maternity leave halfway through. They got a substitute that actually never taught math before. They ended up taking, I think, like trig or something like that, and that was the last math course they could take. So this is a student that is a STEM I don't know if they still are, but that entered as a STEM major, made every single possible choice that they could have had to get the math preparation, which math preparation is very closely aligned to success in STEM.
Yes.
And then they come to our school and then they get destroyed.
Right.
By their math preparation, even though they made every perfect choice that they could have in their situation.
Yeah.
So just thinking about that is really problematic and kind of and tackling the actual problems and shifting faculty mindsets. So a lot of the things that we've been doing might be considered hand-holding of our students. I don't care. I really don't care if you think it's hand-holding, because it's all about making sure the students know what they have to do. And and I sleep okay at night, as long as I've told them what to do. If they choose not to do what I tell them, my responsibility is actually, that's the end of my responsibility.
And everyone needs that, right? At some point in their career, in their life, in their learning, you need that kind of hands-on approach. And if that was absent prior to starting college,
no, absolutely.
Needs to be there.
And that's the other critical piece of our design and philosophy. So we do a lot of what we also call universal design, and thinking about our most marginalized community. So universal design comes out of the disability literature.
Okay.
For example, a wheelchair ramp actually helps more people than just people in a wheelchair. If you're on crutches, or if you have knee problems, the ramp probably also helps you too, even though it wasn't specifically designed for you. So we use this concept in our curriculum that everybody kind of needs a structure. And it's really amazing what you can do. So actually our really strong students thrive even more in these kinds of situations. And then we're starting to push more of our marginalized students up higher in terms of achievement. So it actually does support everyone.
I love that. That's such a powerful analogy, and really speaks to this idea of kind of raising the bar of what we can do in terms of teachers and educators, and developing new ways, perhaps unknowingly, to help other people by focusing our efforts on one group. It's
right. And actually one of my colleagues, Luke Butler, in the biology department, so we have a student success task force, inclusive excellence committee in our school. Luke Butler is on there, and one of the comments he says, if you put all the structure in place and the grades get higher, that's when you can make your class harder. If you actually sit there and think about all this structure in there, you can actually rethink what you're teaching in there and training your students how to actually get this content. And that's actually where I'm at now, where I'm getting such good success in my general chemistry class that I can actually make it harder and kind of rethink how I'm doing. So that's where that inclusive excellence actually comes in. When you think about structures and making things systematic, you can actually make things more difficult.
Right. And kind of going off of that, you were named Educator of the Year last year by National Organization of Gay and Lesbian Scientists and Technical Professions. That's an amazing achievement. So congrats. And could you share with us some of the kind of pedagogical insights, or just some of the things you bring to the classroom that you feel like provided people with the opportunity to award you that?
Yeah, so it's a lot of work. So it's, I've talked a lot about this equity and inclusion kind of stuff, but in terms of, this group itself, they're looking for queer people in general. So one of the things I do bring to the table is I pretty much come out to all my students on day one, sometimes in very subtle ways, sometimes very open.
Okay. How do you decide how to do that?
It's kind of, crapshoot. So sometimes I like to wear nail polish.
Yes.
And having somebody who presents as fairly masculine, wearing glittery nail polish, creates questions, and particularly for many of our cisgender male white students, and actually the students of color too. So So when I queer things up that way, it opens a space to actually have that conversation of, what is it about the nail polish that creates this dissonance in your head? And it's like, let's talk about that. So opening, the space to actually talk about those kinds of things in a science class is, I think, very important, so that we can think about our faculty and our students as something more than just a scientist or a student in my class. So really thinking carefully about those kinds of concepts is how I move forward. And then otherwise, the award itself, it's just accumulation. It's part of the path, getting recognized. So I'm really happy I got recognized for the work that I've been doing. And even if I didn't get recognized for it, I'd still be doing this kind of work because it's fulfilling. But I'm super proud of that award.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, it made my travel arrangements explode quite a bit.
So yeah, you kind of spoke about this dissonance that you create by putting that nail polish on. And I mean, that is what students are going to experience when they see something new for the first time, right? That is, what learning is about, is kind of like going through those mini moments of dissonance in your head. So it kind of sets them up not only to be educated about people and identity and inclusiveness in the classroom, but it also sets them up to learn. And
right, yeah. And that's one of the ways I frame a lot of the learning. So I went to a conference a couple of months ago, and one of the slides that came up is that a person who's learning, or a student, can't tell the difference between a step and a stumble. So when you're going through these kinds of dissonance or anxiety issues, it's really hard to tell whether is that a growth moment or is this me actually falling on my face in that situation. So I think it's really important to recognize that we can't tell the difference while it's happening. Yeah. It's only after you do like really nice reflections about your learning and what's been going on is where you start to actually make those transitions and actually grow from those. And being a scientist is about making mistakes. I think I joked about this I think at dinner, 95 to 99% of what I do doesn't work. So, and then you got to hold on to that one time out of 100 where it actually does work. And then you can build off of that. And success tends to create more success. So when you find that thing you can study, you can actually do, I got these experiments in there. But don't forget, to get to that point, there was probably a lot of dissonance. There's a lot of failure. There's a lot of that. And that is what being a scientist actually is, or an engineer.
Yeah.
You are going to fail.
Yeah.
And it's normal.
Yeah. And we're so often taught that failure is just something we should avoid in school.
Yeah. So we're avoiding the uncomfortable situations. Avoiding failure was what we're kind of trained in high school and even in many college situations.
Definitely.
But we should be embracing failure.
I agree. So it sounds like you had a dean, or you have a dean that's really supportive of what you're doing. Is that kind of presence felt across the chemistry department? And how has that helped you kind of position yourself to do the things you're doing? And do you feel like the situation at the College of New Jersey is unique at the moment compared to other?
Yes. So my dean started the same year as me. We both started in 2006. So it was a complete unknown quantity. When I took the job at TCNJ, I actually had, I believe, 3 offers at that point. Just FYI, it took me 2 years to find a job.
Okay.
So, my first job search failed. I ended up taking a visiting assistant professor position. And then once I did that, I actually got 3 offers for a job. One of them was not tenure track, so eliminated that one.
Okay.
Then I was picking between living in the Bay Area and living in New Jersey, which I never thought in a million years I'd go to New Jersey. Growing up in Pennsylvania, we're always told don't go to Jersey, but it actually ended up being an amazing kind of place. So I think TCNJ is super unique, particularly the School of Science, And I think one of the reasons why it's super unique is that we have this culture on campus that's very much faculty driven, and we got a dean that's super supportive of these kinds of activities. So when I first got to TCNJ, things like grant writing weren't really valued, even though I knew grant writing was important for my scholarship. And this dean, Jeff Osborne, sat there and said, oh no, grant writing is absolutely scholarship. It's absolutely important. Before the dean, scholarship would be counted as service. So typically at a tenure track position, you have to do teaching, scholarship, and service. It's the 3 areas.
Okay.
So they would lump grantmanship as service to the department, which is very odd because it's supporting my research.
Right.
So he was super supportive of that, and that's when I knew how important it is to have an administrator that is actually advocating for you. So sometimes I feel like, this concept of sponsorship, sponsorship comes up in industry. People who will fight for you behind closed doors is very important, and I think my dean was one of those kind of people. So I think he recognized in me personally that I was very super active in grant writing. I was willing to try new and different things. So he actually cultivated me over the years. So my sociologist, Lynn, and I are kind of joke around that he's been cultivating the 2 of us quite a bit, whether it was intentional or not, but, just simply giving support and giving us, time to do this kind of stuff, allowing us to travel, taking us to conferences to talk about these kinds of issues has been super, super critical to my success. So I think, having administrators that actually support these kinds of concepts is ridiculously important.
Right.
So you need kind of this grassroots faculty and student driven desire to do equity inclusion. And then you have to have the support from above that is going to reward that kind of effort.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's, I think a lot of places definitely struggle with getting full support across all levels of their hierarchy.
Right.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah. Even in terms of teaching, this diversity, equity, inclusion is actually embedded in our entire tenure and promotions document now.
Oh,
so
nice. Yeah.
it's part of what we need to do is make sure that we are experimenting with our pedagogy, and that we are creating inclusive classrooms. And we also have, for scholarship, we have a very diverse model of what counts as scholarship at TCNJ. So, this pedagogical research that I'm doing counts the same as a technical kind of work. That's not the case at many different schools.
No.
But my dean is adamant on that. So that's a case of that sponsorship. So an example of that is I had a little bit of trouble getting up my letter for promotion to full professor. Some really awkward statements in there about my pedagogical type grants. And the dean was like, no, that's here, write this response
Okay.
to this, and we will amplify that, and don't worry about it.
Yeah.
So, even within my own department, there was some concerns about the work that I was doing and whether that, quote, counted as scholarship or not.
Yeah. So is that an ongoing kind of process of also educating your peers? Yeah.
So it is educating my peers constantly about this. And we've actually encapsulated this in our latest disciplinary standards. So one of the things we have a tenure and promotion document. We also have a departmental disciplinary standard, which actually outlines what the department feels scholarship actually is. And we're in the process of revising that. And our disciplinary standards at TCNJ are very specific. So you can count how many papers do you need to actually go up for tenure and promotion. And it's easier to count than to evaluate. So as long as you can count easily, you're above the numbers, it's pretty much there. So, ranking quality is a little bit harder to do, which, it's difficult. But our tenure and promotion documents now, completely value pedagogical grants, because I told them, this is what you did to me It's not cool. Everybody else, we need to do better.
Yeah.
And so we kind of capture that. So we are rewarding the people that do these pedagogical social science kind of work.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. I feel like, PUIs are perhaps like leading the way in terms of what should be in the classroom and kind of how to revolutionize the classroom. And I think R1 universities definitely need to take a look at what's going on there, and bring that here would be ideal. So you must have had so many students come through, your classroom and also your lab. This is maybe not much time to think about it, but is there an example of a student success story or someone that sticks out in your mind in terms of kind of how you've impacted them?
Oh yeah. So absolutely. Everybody seems to love a super strong student because then you can quote, you can focus on their research and their their project. I have actually taken a different kind of approach. Is that I've worked with a lot of students that are marginalized. They're students that are just kind of eking through the chemistry major. So I invite those folks into my research space and the work, and the kind of work that we do. So for a while, I had a lot of students that were struggling in the department, and a lot of the time was spent was talking to them about their struggles and kind of how can I help support them? How can we make this research project kind of mesh with the stuff that you need to do? It's okay that you can't come in as many hours as other students because you got this biochem class that is absolutely rocking your world right now, and you need to focus a little bit. So some of the people that I've worked with is that one student invited into my research group, actually took a leave of absence for like 2 to 3 years, went through a lot of personal issues, went back to Puerto Rico for several years, and then actually came back to TCNJ. So typically once a student leaves, they don't typically come back.
Yeah.
But it was because he was working with some folks in our department, not just me. It was a lot of different people. Actually came back and finished the degree, finished his degree. And then what really changed for me and a lot of the students, or a lot of the faculty, or a subset of the faculty, was that this student ended up getting an industry job, and then within like a year got promoted to like a manager level in whatever job that he had. And then all of a sudden got scooped up by ExxonMobil to work there. And this is a student that just kind of eked through the major, which, and that kind of changes your perceptions of what success actually is and what it looks like and what are we actually doing with our education department, or, our education at TCNJ. We're just trying to prepare people for their work. I would say everybody that gets into TCNJ is going to be freaking amazing. And what can we cultivate from them? What kind of stuff can they actually do? Yeah. So your grades don't reflect that all the time.
No. Yeah, which is, especially for students that want to go to grad school, that is often what they're kind of judged upon. Grades, scores, test scores. So, I feel like a lot of people, that don't have the best grades come to graduate school and thrive because like that was the environment that worked for them, or they had a great mentor, or, some other qualities were kind of brought to the surface and they were able to thrive. But perhaps they were excluded from other opportunities because of those grades.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's really wonderful to hear. So yeah, I guess we're almost at the end of our time for what we can capture from you today. Is there a message or some kind of teaching that you want to leave us with? That you'd like to impart on us?
Yeah. So lots of different things, but I kind of will end it with a very similar way as my superpower talk yesterday, is that I feel like all of us have different kinds of superpowers, and we can reflect upon ourselves and how we can kind of help other people. So what I find amazing about young people right now is that we're all thinking more broadly than ourselves, and I haven't seen that in a while. So we should be using our degrees and our potential to help other people. Thinking about our current country and the world as it stands right now, there's a lot of, we don't really think about other people. I think it's time that we start to help other people and kind of help empower others. And once you start learning about that, it's really hard to go back.
Yeah.
And it's also really hard to balance that kind of stuff. So helping other people versus pushing your career forward, depending on what kind of currency your career has, may not value that. But I think being a good citizen in the long run is actually critical. So those are the superpowers that I want people to kind of develop.
Yeah.
And how are they going to help other people, especially people with different lived experiences than themselves?
Yeah. And everyone can have that superpower.
Yes, absolutely.
They just have to nurture it. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me and for sharing, the identities below the tip of the iceberg. It's been really wonderful, and hearing about your pedagogy and your experiences. Thank you so much. So I also want to thank again our producer and editor, Johnny Valeris. So please check out his YouTube channel, The Lone Chemist. And thank you.
Thank you.